It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10. Our top story. Condemnation and praise for the United States after it blocks the demand for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza.
What happened was disgraceful. We expected more pressure, but the US will remain supportive of Israel against us. We're poor, unarmed people who live in tents as refugees.
Other countries should also understand that it is impossible on the one hand to support the elimination of Hamas and on the other hand to call for an end to the war that will prevent the elimination of Hamas.
We hear the evidence of suspected sexual violence and rape by Hamas terrorists on October the 7th. Also tonight, more pressure on the Prime Minister as his former immigration minister warns of red-hot fury from voters. OPEC accused of panic as a leaked letter shows that oil-producing nations were asked to resist plans to phase out fossil fuels. Boos ring out at Old Trafford after a 7th Premier League defeat for Manchester United. And we'll take a first look at tomorrow's front pages in our press preview from 10:30. Good evening. The president of the Palestinian Authority today accused the US of being complicit in what he called Israeli war crimes. That's after the Biden administration's veto of a United Nations Security Council vote which demanded an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. But Mahmoud Abbas's view was echoed by those living in the makeshift humanitarian zone inside Gaza, where charities say half of the population is starving. Fierce fighting has been reported inside the Jabalia refugee camp in northern Gaza, with Israel's Prime Minister insisting he will continue the mission to eliminate Hamas. Our chief correspondent, Stuart Ramsey, has our first report.
Order is breaking down in Gaza. It's been warned about and now it's happening. These people are desperate for everything and anything. They clamber onto one of the few aid trucks allowed to cross the border from Egypt. They start pulling out boxes, throwing them to family members or jumping off with their prize held tight. More run towards the commotion, eager to get their hands on this precious cargo. When they can, aid agencies do attempt an orderly handout of food parcels. But the reality is that what is coming into Gaza is inadequate and barely scratches the surface.
We cannot deliver for many reasons. One, we do not have the necessary goods and supplies. The number of trucks coming in is insufficient to meet the needs and to keep 2.3 million people alive, half of them being children.
To the west, on the Mediterranean coast, the people who have evacuated to Al-Mawazi don't have the opportunity to even attempt to get their hands on aid. There is none. This is a barren wasteland at the best of times. Now it's the worst. They've built their camps themselves. There are hundreds of families here now living cheek by jowl, just surviving. These people are desperate and angry at the United Nations' lack of action.
What happened was disgraceful. We expected more pressure, but the US will remain supportive of Israel against us. We're poor, unarmed people who live in tents as refugees. We were made refugees in 1967 and now again in 2023, when the world is supposed to be more advanced.
There is outrage across the Arab world, and in many other countries too, that the United States vetoed a Security Council resolution calling for a ceasefire in Gaza.
I really appreciate the correct position that the United States has taken in the UN Security Council. Other countries should also understand that it is impossible on the one hand to support the elimination of Hamas and on the other hand to call for an end to the war that will prevent the elimination of Hamas.
Here in the West Bank, the Palestinian leadership accused the US of being complicit in what is described as Israel's war crimes. In the centre of Ramallah, life looks pretty normal despite what's going on in Gaza, but beneath the veneer, it isn't.
There is considerable anger and resentment about what's going on in Gaza, but there's also a sense that there's not much they can do about it. The Israeli security presence here is overwhelming. The IDF carry out regular raids across the whole of the West Bank. And indeed, since October the 7th, over 250 people have been killed here and more than 3,000 injured.
But these numbers are dwarfed by what is happening here in Gaza. More airstrikes in Rafah, another so-called safe area. All they can do is appeal for peace, peace that has been vetoed.
You have to stop the killing of the innocents. You have to stand with the right. I am called the international criminal courts. I'm called the international laws. Where is it? Where's the human rights? I don't see anything.
Israeli soldiers are now engaging in street battles with Hamas fighters. This is Jabalia in Gaza's north. The IDF says their pictures show what was an attempted ambush, which they outflanked and, they say, killed a Hamas cell. With the United States support, there's absolutely no talk here of any ceasefire. Stuart Ramsey, Sky News, on the West Bank.
More evidence is being brought to light about sexual violence carried out by Hamas during the October the 7th attacks, with particular focus on the Nova Music Festival. Hamas has denied accusations of rape and sexual assault, but some survivors of the attacks say they're haunted by what they saw. A warning: this report by our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle, contains graphic descriptions of sexual violence and injuries.
The passing of time has done nothing to lessen the horrors of October the 7th or heal the people who survived the attacks and now live with the terrible memories of that day. Rami Shmuel was the organizer of the Nova Music Festival. He is haunted by the signs of sexual abuse he found when he returned to the site.
What my eyes saw is only 3 young girls, and the way we saw them, the way we found them, it's like they didn't just rape them and abuse them sexually. They humiliate them. In the way they killed them, executed them, murdered them. It's something that monsters only do. One of the girls over there, they spread fuel on her face and tortured her like she was a candle.
The accounts of sexual violence are almost unspeakable. Women raped so violently that their pelvises broke. People shot in their genitalia. Young girls found bound, stripped, and shot. Hamas vehemently denies its fighters raped anyone, and it would contradict Islamic teaching. But Israeli experts believe that sexual violence was a deliberate tactic of genocide.
It is seen as an extremely potent manner to achieve the ultimate humiliation and devastation of the enemy. The body of the woman is perceived to be as a symbol of the body of the nation, so violating, invading the body of women is taken as if the whole nation is being invaded and violated.
Israel feels the world has been too slow to speak up and condemn acts of gender-based violence.
I say to the women's rights organizations, to the human rights organizations, you've heard of the rape of Israeli women? Horrible atrocities, sexual mutilation? Where the hell are you?
Because so many of the victims and the attackers are dead, gathering evidence and building criminal cases will be very hard. Many of the corpses were too decomposed by the time they could be retrieved. Many of the dead were buried quickly under Jewish law before the testimonies of sexual violence were properly realized or understood. The trauma of Israel's blackest day gets ever darker. Alistair Bunkle, Sky News, in Tel Aviv.
Meanwhile, thousands in Tel Aviv have gathered tonight to hear the testimonies of the hostages Hamas has released from Gaza.
The days there pass like an eternity. They're incredibly difficult. It's the hunger, it's the longing for my family, it's the difficult mentality, the difficult conditions.
Every day there is like hell. Abnormal fear, zero sleep. At night the longings are crazy, and the not knowing is just scary.
Rishi Sunak was dealt a further blow today in his attempts to pacify his own party on migration after his former immigration minister, Robert Jenrick, claimed there are too many migrants coming to the UK to be able to integrate into society. Mr Jenrick, who resigned earlier this week, also said that any suggestion the Prime Minister's proposed Rwanda legislation will remove people who arrive on small boats is for the birds. Our chief political correspondent, John Craig, has this report, which does contain flash photography.
In the heart of Middle England, Newark has been represented since 2014 by Robert Jenrick.
It's been quite a day for you.
And in his first comments after his resignation, he says the Tories will face the red-hot fury of voters unless they cut immigration. He also claims Rishi Sunak's Rwanda bill will lead to a merry-go-round of legal challenges. By allowing individuals to make claims that their circumstances mean they cannot be sent to Rwanda, the bill invites each small boat arrival to concoct a reason to delay their removal, he wrote in the Daily Telegraph.
I refuse to sit by and allow us to fail.
Mr Jenrick won strong support from his old boss, Suella Braverman, who this week told MPs the Tories face electoral oblivion if the Rwanda bill fails. She tweeted, "Robert Jenrick deserves credit for putting principle before career. He knows the detail. It's very concerning that he can't defend the bill." In Newark's Christmas market, this couple who run a care home say they could be strapped for workers under the crackdown on legal migration.
Illegal migration got to be stopped. Legal migration has got to be encouraged. We have got brilliant people that's come from all over the world.
But this stall holder, a second-generation Nigerian, says Mr Jenrick was right to quit.
If you're going to do the job, you have to be in line with who you're working for, and doesn't agree with them, so I think he did the right thing, so yes.
Mr Sunak has launched a weekend charm offensive on rebel Tory MPs, after warning them they must unite or die. MPs will debate and vote on the bill on Tuesday. But even if it's passed, opponents will attempt to amend it during its later stages. MPs are also alarmed at the spiralling cost of the Rwanda plan and have summoned the Home Office's top civil servant, Sir Matthew Rycroft, to an emergency hearing on Monday.
Our job is to scrutinise government policy and to make sure there's value for money in what the government are spending, and this has had to be basically dragged out of the Home Office, and it's not satisfactory at all.
This week, during a visit by the Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte, Mr Sunak appeared to be locked out of number 10. His Tory critics claim that if the Rwanda plan fails, he won't get back in after the election.
And John joins me now from Downing Street. The Prime Minister saying that the party should unite or die. How's it looking for his Rwanda plan next week?
The Prime Minister's come out fighting ahead of a week which could define his premiership. Enormous challenge when the Rwanda bill is debated by MPs. And in a statement ahead of the big battle with rebel Tory MPs on Tuesday, Mr Sunak is saying that this week will take a significant step towards securing our borders, thwarting the evil trade of the smuggling gangs and ending the injustice of illegal migration. He says that people in this country care deeply about stopping the boats. A government that governs in their interests must act on these entirely legitimate concerns. But then he launches into a powerful attack on Labour. It's why Labour are not fit to govern, he says. They've no plans to tackle illegal immigration. They'd push up illegal migration higher with a burden-sharing agreement for asylum seekers with the EU. However, while the Prime Minister comes out fighting, he has been dealt a serious blow. Because writing in the Sunday Telegraph, Sir Bill Cash, the veteran Eurosceptic Tory MP, who has been asked by right-wing Tory MPs to set up a so-called star chamber and examine whether the bill will work or not, Sir Bill has said in an article that he talks about a star chamber with external immigration lawyers, said they're currently considering the bill with a view to deciding if its wording is sufficiently watertight to meet the government's policy objectives. And he warns, at present it does not. Well, those words will send a shudder through Downing Street and the Tory High Command, because if Sir Bill continues with that position until Tuesday, we could see a sizable rebellion from the Tory right, or even a large number of abstentions, which could put the bill in jeopardy, because Labour, despite Mr Sunak's attacks, Labour are voting against. And Sir Bill is suggesting that a lot of Tory MPs, on his advice, may be going to rebel on Tuesday.
We shall see. John, thank you. Let's stay with immigration, and universities are warning they won't be able to compete internationally for the best and brightest academic talent under new rules. Higher education leaders have told Sky News an increase in the minimum salary and healthcare fees for a skilled worker visa could deter early career academics and researchers who are vital to driving innovation. Sky's business correspondent Paul Kelso has more.
Maria got her degree and PhD in Sweden, but she's doing her postdoctoral research into blood cancers in York, and she's not alone.
We have Polish, Mexican, Egyptian, Indian, Chinese, Swedish.
Academia is truly global, but universities fear new visa rules may make it harder to compete.
It feels like you have to really sort of fight to prove that you deserve to be here, which I think is a bit unfair. Because in the end, we're coming here to do research in the name of UK universities, right? So that's something that should be incentivized and promoted, but rather it feels like there are just more and more hurdles that we have to get over.
32% of the academic workforce is foreign, around 75,000 people. The top 5 countries are Italy, China, Germany, Ireland and the United States. But the minimum salary for a skilled worker visa is going up from £26,200 to £38,700. That's well above the average early career academic salary of £30,000 to £35,000. On top of that, international staff will have to pay more for their health care, the NHS surcharge rising from £624 to £1,035 paid up front. Professor David Kent, himself Canadian, says the changes could leave higher education exposed.
Those people are now going to be faced with a choice because, they're in the middle of a recruitment process, and I'm going to say, I'd like to interview you. They say, well, what does my future look like if I've got this £1,000 a year for my healthcare surcharge? I've got to meet this minimum threshold, and they're going to have a lot more considerations. And if that's a German postdoc looking at positions, say, in Germany and France and the UK, there are these extra obstacles.
The fear is British universities won't be able to hire the best and brightest because they can't afford it.
The government says it's raising the minimum salary to get a visa to try and encourage better jobs and better pay for British workers. But it also says it wants the UK to be a science and technology superpower. And to do that, you need academia. The ideas and innovation had in places like this today is the jobs and industries of the future.
Universities are already under acute financial pressure, heavily reliant on overseas students as well as staff.
If we're actually saying that the UK is seeking to boost its economy, to be an international global player, then it needs to be having a constructive, engaged and really creative policy towards the employment of that vital talent that we need from all over the world.
Academia is not the only industry affected by the political squeeze on legal migration that may yet deliver a hard lesson in simple economics. Paul Kelso, Sky News in York.
The Metropolitan Police say a 16-year-old boy has been charged with the murder of Leanne Gordon. The 42-year-old was shot dead in East London on Tuesday evening. The teenager was also charged with possession of a firearm with intent to endanger life and with possession with intent to supply Class A drugs. 2 people have been killed in a crash involving a police vehicle. It happened at Moorville Heath in Shropshire this morning. A man in his 60s who was driving a Skoda and a female passenger in her 50s died. The Independent Office for Police Conduct is investigating. Environmental activists have accused the oil industry of panicking after it emerged that the leader of the OPEC group of oil-producing countries wrote to members asking them to block language in any agreement that would move to phase out fossil fuels. Campaigners say the world needs to reduce the use of oil, gas and coal to try to limit global warming. Our climate reporter Victoria Seabrook has more.
Nearly 30 years of climate change summits. No real mention in the treaties of the main cause, fossil fuels. At this year's COP28 in Dubai, a proposal to ditch them has gathered traction like never before.
We must be bold and deliver a phase out of the consumption and production of fossil fuels, all fossil fuels, and deliver access to clean, renewable energy for all.
But oil producers are pushing the panic button. In a leaked letter, the head of the OPEC oil group this week warned members the disproportionate pressure against fossil fuels may reach a tipping point with irreversible consequences. He urged countries to reject any text or formula that targets energy, i.e. fossil fuels, rather than emissions. He's arguing fossil fuels aren't the problem, it's the gases released from burning them. OPEC member Saudi Arabia is leading the charge to keep fossil fuels alive, but with expensive technology to capture the emissions. Many say this tech is no excuse for business as usual.
For the first time at the climate conference, we have the chance of an outcome that is not shaped by old power politics, by old fossil power politics, but by an alliance of action.
It's not only the major producers who fear a phase-out.
The development of our countries depends, in fact, on the use of fossil fuels. It's not easy for countries like ours to accept a text that agrees to end fossil fuels today, because what do we do after that?
What do we want? Phase out! When do we want it? Now!
At COP28, countries feel like they're fighting for their survival. But what that means can be worlds apart, depending on which part of the world you're from. Victoria Seabrook, Sky News.
Time now to get the latest sports news with James.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality. Getting more people more active. Live life with Vitality.
It's now a warning. Some viewers may find some of what we're about to discuss distressing, something our reporter Eleanor Roper is here to tell us about. Eleanor, OK, so we're going to see white ribbons, a lot of them. You're sporting one for us now.
Yep.
What is the campaign actually about?
Well, White Ribbon UK is the leading charity here in the UK, which is working, as you say, to end violence towards women and girls. But their work isn't just about the violence, it's also about trying to tackle the root causes of violence. So they talk about targeting beliefs, sort of deep-rooted beliefs and harmful thoughts that people might have, which kind of fuel inequality here in the UK. So it's about targeting some of those underlying thoughts that people might have and things that ultimately can go on to lead to violence. So they're urging us all to open up the debate, chat to the women in our lives and try and learn a bit more about gender inequality and what it means. We're going to hear in a moment from someone who's been affected. But I think first we've got some pictures of the Wales team. This was on Tuesday night. You can see them coming off the bus here. They were sporting some white ribbons for their game against Turkey. And I think, as you say, we'll see plenty more ribbons over the course of the weekend, whether it's pundits, whether it's players, other people choosing to raise awareness about this subject. You mentioned there that some people might find what we're about to say upsetting. We're going to hear from Emma now. She has first-hand experience of domestic violence at the hands of her ex-partner. Here she is.
He was a big Fulham fan and he just loved going out and watching the game. According to him, it's what you did with the lads. But for me, it was just another time of fear because I knew it was fueled with cocaine and alcohol, and I would always bear the brunt of his bad moods when he got home. He would say it was his excuse, and the next day he would be apologetic and say it was, because he drank too much or it was because his team lost football. But the reality is nothing like that causes domestic abuse. It is all about power and control.
Horrible. This should have been a joyous scene. We know it's not. So how does it, well, it is, but it isn't. How does this relate to the White Ribbon campaign?
Well, what we saw this summer with Jenny Hermoso being kissed after she won the World Cup has opened up this debate about consent, about misogyny, and about the behaviour that women have been sadly having to put up with for some time. There'll be women watching this who've experienced something similar themselves. And so while the incident, as you say, itself unpleasant, we've been hearing from charities who have said there is a positive in there, and that is that it has opened up the conversation. It was, of course, a huge talking point this summer, and that in itself has surely got to be a positive. So we're going to hear now from Anthea Sully, who is the Chief Executive of White Ribbon UK, as well as from someone from the government. Here they are.
Men do need to think about their own behaviour. They need to be challenging their own attitudes and the assumptions that they have and think about that. And it can be very easy for men to say, well, I'm not violent, this isn't me, this isn't how I behave. Well, I think it's important to check yourself on that and spend time asking questions to women that you know. You may be surprised at the answers they give you about how they're living their lives. How we talk about women risk assessing all the time to keep themselves safe. It's worth having those conversations. And then think when you're out with your friends, when you're at work, talking to your colleagues, are there things that make you then reflect and think that that's uncomfortable, what's being said here? Are there sexist jokes being spoken? And knowing how to intervene in that is so important. So it's about going that extra stage to thinking, actually, I don't want to be silent about this. We need to talk about this.
I just make one observation. One or two of the most serious cases that have occurred in the last 5 years, some of which have resulted in the woman losing her life, have started that day at a sport match. So it can't be denied that there is sometimes a very dark sort of stream that happens between the sport match.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality.
West End theatre workers have told Sky News they're increasingly coming under attack from violent and rowdy audience members. They say venues are partly to blame for putting profits ahead of safety. Our arts and entertainment correspondent Katie Spencer spoke to some of them.
Show-stopping for all the wrong reasons. Police at this West End performance of Grease escorting 4 rude and abusive audience members out. While videos like these frequently go viral, theatre workers have told Sky News they're regularly dealing with far worse.
While many of the front-of-house workers we spoke to were too afraid to say anything on camera, what they told us off camera was disturbing. Accounts of drunk theatre-goers urinating wherever they like, projectile vomiting during the shows, finding used condoms in the stalls, physical fights breaking out between the seats, and staff not only being verbally abused, but physically assaulted.
Concerned that top management at some venues are putting profit over safety, and at the same time fearful speaking out could cost him his job, this theatre worker agreed to talk to us anonymously about being assaulted by a man who'd arrived late.
He basically slammed me against the wall and then walked in. I've had bar staff being shouted at. We've had fights. Injured patrons who've needed the assistance of ambulances. It's quite common. I've had a friend who was barely 5'2" who was punched in the face by a man who was 6'9".
We were also shown one theatre group's internal incident reports. That person telling Sky News, we have to ask people to leave probably at least once a week. Composer Stephen Schwartz has worked in theatre for over 5 decades, on hits from Godspell to Wicked.
What's exasperating is the cell phones and people being on their cell phones, and you want to say to them, just then go out in the lobby and, text on your phone and let everybody else watch the show.
Of 15,000 workers who responded to a survey by theatre union Bectu, 90% said they regularly witnessed bad behaviour.
Undoubtedly, theatres had a torrid time during COVID. They were the first to close and the last to open, so it's inevitable that they want to try and claw back some of that lost revenue by selling more alcohol before performances. But I think that is a contributing factor to the problems.
None of the theatre owners Sky News approached wanted to comment. While the show must go on, away from the stage, it's theatre workers who are having to deal with audiences acting out. Katie Spencer, Sky News.
Well, coming up next, the press preview. Tonight we're joined by assistant editor at the Sunday Mirror, Laura Armstrong, and former Conservative Special Advisor, Anita Boisset. Amongst the stories we'll be discussing, this on the front of the Sunday Telegraph, their headline, Tory Star Chamber rejects PM's flights plan. We'll be right back with that story and others. Do stay with us.
It's quite an arrogance, really, for us to suggest that it could be the smelliest, and it's very, very difficult to qualify that. All I can tell you is that friends have bought it, and partners have sometimes said, you either eat it in one or you put it in the garage. They want to treat it like kryptonite. It does have a particularly bad smell, and it should be locked up and put somewhere else. So I think the general effect is most people find when they open the packet to start with, they think, well, it's not that bad. You know, I can cope with that. But if you put it in the car and then go and do some shopping and come back, you'll definitely know all about it. If you put it in the fridge and you open the door, you think, time to get the dog out of the house. Something's wrong with Grandpa. This is not working. So it can be very off-putting. But the smell, it's a sulfurous, it's cabbagey. It is very dominant. It's the kind of bacterium that likes to live in hot, sweaty places. So if you've kept your wellies on for a fortnight, you know, that's what you might expect. It's actually surprisingly quite mild in that respect. It doesn't. We've never tried to make cheeses that rip your tongue out and beat you about the head and shoulders with them. We want something that's reasonably subtle and a bit sort of proteiny. It's quite close in some ways to a really nice, ripe, unctuous, maybe slightly meaty brie.
And there's obviously a demand. We know smelly cheeses are popular. What is the appeal?
I think people just traveled so much more. When I was a little boy, I used to show people around the dairy and try and pick up some tips. And we used to have a very simple cottage cheese with some wild garlic leaf in it. And when you mention garlic to anybody, they're like, oh, no, we don't eat that foreign stuff. People have traveled, people are experiencing more now. And, you know, we see it's difficult for the territorial cheesemakers of the UK. That's definitely a market that's declining. We're still dominated by cheddar, of course. That's very, very much the part of it. But people are experiencing these new tastes from continental Europe, and they want more of it.
Welcome back. You're watching Sky News. In just a moment, the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages of the newspapers as they arrive. But first, our top stories. The US has been condemned for blocking calls for a ceasefire in Gaza as fierce fighting continues. Former Minister Robert Jenrick has warned Rishi Sunak of red-hot fury from voters on immigration. And the Metropolitan Police say a 16-year-old boy has been charged with the murder of Leanne Gordon in East London on Tuesday evening. You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with assistant editor at the Sunday Mirror, Laura Armstrong, and former Conservative Special Advisor, Anita Boisset. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. The Sunday Telegraph says that a group of top lawyers in the Tory party have studied the Prime Minister's Rwanda migration plan and concluded that it's still not fit for purpose and not watertight enough if challenged in the courts. The Sunday Express leads with a message from Rishi Sunak to Labour, challenging them to back his scheme if they're really serious about ending the small boats crisis. The Observer reports that Labour is to toughen up its policy on the Israel-Hamas conflict, with Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy to deliver the party's strongest criticism yet of Israel over its attacks on Palestinians and the destruction in Gaza. The Sunday Times leads with a study by the Centre for Social Justice, which concludes that the COVID pandemic has left the UK divided into two nations, similar to the Victorian era. The Sunday People says that England fans could be facing a beer drinking ban at next year's European Football Championships in Germany. The Mirror has a story about former boxer David Hayes' apparent relationship with Coronation Street star Helen Flanagan, even though he's still seeing somebody else. The Sun says that I'm a Celebrity contestant Danielle Harold needed medical treatment after a serious health scare in the jungle, but was able to carry on. And finally, The Star tells us that AI chatbots are useless when it comes to thinking up chat-up lines to use on someone you fancy. And a reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by Laura Armstrong and Anita Boateng. Welcome to you both, giggling at that last headline. We won't be discussing that, I don't think. Let's start with more serious matters and having a look at the Observer front page. And it's really about it's seemingly a change of tact from Labour in terms of their pronouncements on the war between Israel and Hamas. David Lammy is quoted. Laura.
Yes, so this is Labour's strongest criticism of Israel that it's made so far. The piece makes it very clear that in saying this, David Lammy has the full backing of Keir Starmer. It feels to me like this was sort of waiting to happen. Obviously, there was a lot of controversy over Keir Starmer's decision to not call for a ceasefire, with nearly a quarter of MPs, Labour MPs, publicly calling for that. And it seems like he sort of bided his time a little bit and waited, and this is a real moment to do this, as the US have vetoed that ceasefire, as we're seeing humanitarian trucks being sort of overcome with desperate people rolling into Gaza. It feels like this is a very particular move and one he's been waiting to make for a while.
Yes, he's describing the death and destruction in Gaza over the past 2 months as intolerable and attacking two far-right Israeli cabinet ministers for totally unacceptable support of illegal settlements in the West Bank.
Yes, although I think I see this as a bit more smoke and mirrors, Gillian, because the criticism here is really about the conduct in the West Bank, and a lot of the controversy when it comes to the Western response is really about the operation in Gaza and the attempt to get rid of Hamas leadership. But on the West Bank, I think most people would say that what Israel have been doing is pretty intolerable. Lord Cameron, the new Foreign Secretary, just a couple of weeks ago talked about the unacceptable violence in the West Bank. So it doesn't feel like that the Labour Party is particularly out of step with the government on its position with what Israel has been doing in the West Bank, particularly around the settlements. And it's worth reminding your viewers that really the levels of deprivation and violence and anarchy that are going on in the West Bank right now is sort of been pushed to the side because of the focus on the operation in Gaza. But you have conditions there that some say are kind of worse than they were in the pandemic, you know, shoplifting becoming endemic and all sorts of real structural problems in the West Bank. So I think good on Labour for drawing attention to the fact that the West Bank has serious challenges. But I think it's more about the briefing in we're being very tough on Israel to settle some of those nerves across the party that want a ceasefire rather than a material difference in where Labour's positioning itself.
But seemingly he is also talking specifically about the death and destruction in Gaza as well.
Yeah.
Intolerable.
Yeah.
Just to be clear. Let's move on to the Express and Rwanda, the country that's going to be on the lips of many next week with that vote coming in. But what we're reading here is that Rishi Sunak is really laying down the gauntlet to Labour and saying that if they really cared about the country and this issue, they would support the government.
This felt quite desperate to me. It feels like there's a level of serious worry there that we're reading about across the papers that this isn't going to work. Obviously, you've got legal advisors saying there's only a 50% chance of these planes taking off. And ahead of this vote, it feels to me that Rishi is panicking a little bit and saying, actually, over to you, and sort of taking the focus a little bit off what's happening at home.
Well, from what we've read thus far, Anita, the party is extremely divided over this, and the vote could be quite close.
Yes, and it's pretty extraordinary to think that you could have a second reading vote be under this amount of kind of scrutiny and uncertainty. For what it's worth, I do think it will pass second reading, but the question becomes what happens when it survived contact with the Lords in particular, where you might see a series of amendments and defeats that make the bill much more difficult to deliver any of its intentions. So I think this is a real challenging moment. Now, on the defiant challenge to Labour, never miss an opportunity to make the point, right, that Labour doesn't really, what's its position on the small boats crisis? But yes, as Lucy says, is this the heart of the challenge? No, it's more on the Conservative side.
Yeah, it's not really about Labour at this point in time. Laura, do you see this as a real challenge to Rishi Sunak's premiership?
I do, yeah. I think that this has dominated headlines now for a week, and it's emerging more and more as something that is, the central focus. And I think that there's also been a series of blows. You've obviously got Robert Jenrick this week. That's a real blow for the Prime Minister, especially for a politician that was previously one of his greatest allies. And, these sort of hard-hitting quotes that we're seeing, that this is the triumph of hope over experience for the bill, saying that the Tories are risking, the red-hot fire of being beaten in an election if they continue along this path. So I think that there have been a series of blows this week, and yes, I think it's very serious. There'll be a lot of eyes on Tuesday for sure.
Anita, let's move to the Telegraph and speaking more to the divisions within the Conservative Party. They're talking about a star chamber of Conservative lawyers that are saying that Sunak's deportation plans are not fit for purpose.
Yes, the Conservative Party does rather love a star chamber. So, yes, this is a gathering of legal people who have actually done this in the past over the Brexit bill, over the deal with Northern Ireland. There are always these moments where this group sort of gets together and decides whether they're happy with the current proposals from the government. So, yeah, what they're saying is that the legislation is insufficiently watertight to avoid any legal challenges coming from illegal migrants wanting to remain in the UK and not being, sent to Rwanda. And it feels as though this is partly the Robert Jenrick story. Laura just mentioned, Jenrick positioning himself as saying he doesn't think this bill is really going to work. That's what this Star Chamber is also saying, which is that this bill is not going to kind of kill stone dead any threats of legal challenge to the bill. There is also this really interesting nugget in this story from Suella Braverman, the former Home Secretary, who says that pours doubt or questions Sunak's claim that if the bill were to go further and to specifically talk about getting the UK out of the ECHR, for instance, that Rwanda would not be happy with that. She says that's a rather strange claim. And so this is part of the thing that Sunak and his team have been arguing as a bulwark against those who think the bill should be tougher and saying, well, the Rwandese would not accept that. So if that shifts in the next coming week, then I think that could be potentially quite explosive.
But isn't that something that the Rwandans have said themselves, that the deal could be collapsed?
Yes, I mean, it's slightly strange because I have sort of been watching this and read Jenrick's resignation letter with interest, going, well, if it goes further, surely the issue is Rwanda. It doesn't matter if the bill is tougher if Rwanda then says, I'm backing out because we don't like the kind of where the bill's going. So there is something very interesting at the heart of this matter, which is specifically on this point about could the bill be toughened up realistically?
So that's the previous Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, Robert Jenrick, and the Star Chamber saying that it's not tough enough. It doesn't go far enough. It doesn't bode well for Tuesday, does it?
It doesn't, no. And I think that there's also been a lot of noise around the Star Chamber that Tory MPs were waiting to hear what the Tory party said. As Anita said, they do love a Star Chamber. So I think a lot of people were keeping their powder dry to see what this verdict was going to be. So the fact that this has come back now will be yet another slap. And you've obviously got Suella here talking in the Sunday Telegraph, echoing the concerns of Robert Jenrick, particularly over the fact that this bill still allows legal challenges by individual migrants. She's taking that further than he did in his resignation letter and saying that it could actually add 6 months to each of these appeals. So it's sort of hit after hit for the Prime Minister at this point, I think.
Anita, take us to the Sunday Times, and this is a study done by the Centre for Social Justice, just saying that the pandemic has left Britain with a social divide that mirrors Victorian times.
Yes, this is a really fascinating study by the Centre for Social Justice, which is kind of the theme that we've had throughout the kind of since responding to the pandemic, which is that existing trends have been dramatically escalated by virtue of the pandemic. So there are some remarkable statistics in here about how calls to domestic abuse helplines rose 700%, 1.2 million more people went on working age benefits, 86% of more people sought help for alcohol addiction. So it's really drawing attention to the fact that there are certain pockets, you know, fairly small pockets kind of numerically, but where you saw dramatic changes in their kind of profile and ability to weather some of the kind of more difficult times that have been faced since then, and looking ahead to where the economy is going right now. So a really important look, I think, at some of the social fabric questions and the kind of public realm questions that have appeared since the pandemic.
OK. Anita and Laura, thank you very much for the moment. We're going to break now. Coming up, we'll be looking at the Royal Christmas card, which features on many of the front pages this evening, including the Daily Telegraph. Stay with us for more on that and other stories.
I'm David Blevins, and I'm Sky's senior Ireland correspondent. I'm based in Belfast, a city transformed by peace, but still struggling with its past. Politically, the two sides are as far apart as ever, and it's over that question of who has sovereignty in Northern Ireland, the very issue that's been the source of tension here for generations. It takes 60 minutes to cross the Irish Sea. It took the British monarchy a century. I've spent 25 years reporting the journey from conflict to peace.
The political parties of Northern Ireland have reached agreement.
We help you understand the world with us.
Today, we have reached an agreement with the Conservative Party on support for government in Parliament.
We already know what the government gets out of this deal. What exactly does the DUP get out of it? Well, £1.5 billion. Welcome to Winterfell. It's an iconic location in this globally acclaimed drama. Ophelia was the most powerful hurricane this far east in the Atlantic on record. You can't live in a place like this and not appreciate the environment.
My most memorable story was, and still is, the disappearance of Madeleine McCann.
Please give our little girl back.
I can't undo what's happened, but I can help explain it.
Five of us have made it out of the car.
welcome to Backstage, the film and TV podcast.
Welcome back. You are watching the press preview. Still with me, assistant editor at the Sunday Mirror, Laura Armstrong, and the former Conservative Special Advisor, Anita Boateng. Let's take a look at the Express and this prediction of 2 back-to-back storms due to bring more floods and misery. Laura, I think it's your turn.
Yes, it's always casts kind of grimness into your heart to look at these stories, doesn't it, and realise what's coming for some people. Obviously, there's going to be a fairly miserable couple of weeks in certain areas of the country, and particularly as it's so cold. We all have those images in our minds of kind of waterlogged and flooded towns and people having to be rescued. So it's just hopefully people are prepared.
And the first storm is Ellen.
Yes, and the second one, Storm Fergus, are on their way. So 33 flood warnings, that's quite serious. And then the Met Office giving yellow warnings until 3 a.m. In the morning. So clearly these are going to be quite intense and cause masses of disruption and misery to so many.
I'm a celebrity. Get me out of here, Laura. You'll be contributing most of this thing because we've not watched any of it.
Yeah, well, I mean, for some people, this will be very interesting news. Millions of people watching the show, and this is Danielle Harold, who has only recently gone out in the last couple of days, and was at one point quite widely tipped to win the show. And it turns out, the Sun reports that she's had this secret health scare while she's in there that has made her lose a stone in weight. It must have been quite horrible for her if she was experiencing that in there, but the Sun reports that she has battled through and managed to stick it out, so good for her.
And Anita, you've not been tempted to watch, even though Nigel Farage is still in?
Yes, I mean, I've heard tales of Nigel Farage sort of not wearing a shirt and dancing and flashing in the shower, but sadly that's weirdly not drawn me to watching the programme. But I mean, definitely good on her for sticking it out, because, to be in front of the cameras in that kind of environment and also incredibly sick does not sound easy. So, congratulations to her.
Let us finish off with this photo of the Royals. This is their official Christmas card. Stylised. I think it is in black and white, or is that just how we've put it?
It is in black and white.
It is in black and white. Yeah, quite stylised, relaxed. Laura?
Do you know what? I have to be honest, when I saw this picture sort of flashed up during our conference, I was very disappointed, because you're expecting a bright, beautiful, really lovely picture that's going to look great on the front page or wherever you choose to put it. And the black and white was a bit of a disappointment for me, I'm going to be honest.
Really?
Yeah.
Don't think it's stylish?
I think it's very stylish, but I think I'm very conscious of how hard it is to make 5 people, especially when 3 of them are children, look nice. And I think it could have been a bit brighter.
Quite harsh, Anita.
Well, usually the Princess of Wales takes quite a lot of photos, and that's sometimes featured in the... So it's a bit of a shame that she didn't sort of do the artwork, because some of them have been quite fun over the years. I mean, I think everyone looks great in it, and I think we were just talking, the kids look so grown up now. Like, Prince George is like 10 years old, but I guess he looks incredibly smart and mature in his photo.
It's very tall, isn't he?
Yeah, he is tall. It's a lovely photo. Yes, maybe they could have thrown the boat out and gone for something more exciting, more challenging, but it's still a nice photo.
Not particularly Christmassy, although quite stylish, I'd say, the option for black and white. But, Laura, what would you have liked to see instead?
Just a colour version of exactly the same thing.
Oh, really? Okay.
I think it's a lovely picture of all of them, and I think it's just perhaps it's a newspaper perspective. I think it would look better on a page.
Anita, should there have been a Christmas tree in the background, some baubles, something of that nature?
I'm a fan of the photo that's taken in the summer. That just reminds me of summer times because it's so miserable and all the storms are coming. So, yeah, I think a bit of, like, energy, a bit of, like, family dynamics.
Let's take a quick look at the King's Christmas card in contrast, which is on screen now.
Yeah, that's full regalia. Yes. That sort of pomp and ceremony, lots of red and opulence.
Yeah.
Why
I think
not?
That says Christmas a little bit more. Thank you both, Anita and Laura. We'll see you in the next hour. Thank you. Let's take a look at the weather for you now.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, the mild but unsettled weather continues this weekend with further bouts of wet and windy weather to come. The remnants of Storm Ellen will clear into the North Sea on Sunday morning, but the next pulse of cloudy, wet and windy weather will move across Ireland towards southwest Britain. Outbreaks of rain, heavy at times, will push eastwards on Sunday, accompanied by strong winds and a risk of coastal gales, this time from Storm Fergus. The ground is very saturated, increasing the risk of flooding and travel disruption. During the afternoon, further outbreaks of thundery rain will spread into parts of Ireland and Northern Ireland, accompanied by strengthening winds and a risk of severe gales, especially for counties Clare, Galway and Mayo. Monday brings a better chance of some drier and brighter interludes as Sunday's rain gradually dies away.